Well, I had two things in mind. One, I was going to read, speaking of comfort food and Babette's feast, I was going to read something from a piece that I'd written from Japan on the making of artisanal tofu, which is the comfort food of Japan in many ways. And then I thought, well, that doesn't have... Comfort food, of course, always has to do with family, but I thought instead I would read a little bit from the introduction to my book of essays, represents sort of 20 years at the New Yorker writing cultural criticism. But in the introduction, I write a bit about how I became a writer, and I want to keep it very brief. So the part that I won't read tells about my family's strange connection to the New Yorker, which is that my grandfather, Leo Meisner, was hired to run the Viennese model bakery by the father of Ralph Fleischmann, who was the New Yorker's first publisher, founding publisher. And Ralph Fleischmann, his father, apprenticed him to my grandfather to learn the business of making dough. They learned how to make the green kind, but Ralph had to learn how to make the white kind. And when my mother was 16, Ralph Fleischmann gave her a job as a receptionist at the New Yorker, and this would have been, well, she lied about her age. It would have been 1930. So that's the brief background to this, which is really about mothers and how one becomes who one is. There are many ways for a woman to be lost or to lose herself, and the subject has become one of my specialties. The first of my lost women was my mother Alice, who was born 2 blocks from the Yorkville brownstone where I have raised my son. She was generally as unconfiding about herself as a fugitive, which in a way she was, a fugitive from a life that she might have lived. Alice was the dormouse in a family that loved drama. A Catholic daughter with the same temperament might have dreamed of the convent. Alice put her faith in the efficacy of silent worry on everyone's behalf. She devoured her father's kipful of Viennese croissant as voraciously as she read her brother's books, and mutely retreated to the fire escape from household storms. Her younger sister, Charlotte, a tomboy with Titian hair, once bashed Alice over the head with a violin. I just got fed up with her goodness, my aunt told me 70 years later. At 16, however, which was the year she went to work for the New Yorker, Alice sloughed her cocoon of flesh, she had been very fat, and emerged as a shapely girl whose loveliness was both sensuous and fragile. There was something about her enigmatic smile in an old photograph, behind dark glasses or at the beach in a jersey bathing suit and a striped turban, which suggests that she enjoyed her effect on men. Her decorative stint as a temporary receptionist in the New Yorker's hallowed premises on West 43rd Street led, after she graduated from Hunter College, to her employment as a fashion forecaster at Condé Nast. She could never explain exactly what she did beyond spending a fortune on hats and going to the theater and the opera during intermissions, where she made notes on whatever trends in fashion she could discern. By the time I was old enough to take stock of my mother's character, she had reverted to the habits, the furtive eating and daydreaming of her girlhood. Having once been vain of her complexion, she showed a vain indifference to its ravages, which gave her a resemblance to the old Auden. After one of her periodic bouts of starvation dieting, she bought some pretty clothes, and a rich sister-in-law gave her a Dior hand-me-down that she wore to PTA meetings, but eventually it went the way of her resolve. I knew her mainly as a semi-recluse in a shabby house dress who read with a pencil in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Smoking was probably her greatest indulgence, followed by order, solitude, lists, foul weather, crosswords, and grammar. And the grammarian was a martinet. Alice told me proudly that when Ulysses was first published, she had punctuated Molly Bloom's soliloquy. Until I left for college, my compositions got the same treatment. You have to admit that it reads better this way, she would say, having mutilated some piece of homework with a pair of scissors. The first time that I received a galley, it was my first New Yorker piece on Nadine Gordimer, corrected by the late Eleanor Gould, the New Yorker's formidable chief copy editor. It felt as though my maternal nemesis had come back to haunt me. The margins were almost a work of art, every inch finely tattooed with wispy hieroglyphs like the feet of a Moroccan bride. So I took out my mother's old primers, Longmans, Fowler, Strunk and White, and vowed to make Miss Gould pay Alice, if not me, her most grudging compliment, a clean proof. Alice was over 40 when I was born, and as she needed to become invisible for long stretches, she was fortunate to have produced a placid only daughter who could distract herself. When I was 8, I began to write verse. These sing-song ditties Alice believed might one day be of interest to posterity, so she recopied them in her schoolmarm's penmanship into a loose-leaf binder. But then she did something I can't explain. She wrote half a dozen poems of her own, and like a crooked card shop, she shuffled them into the pack. They parroted my diction, but their artful lightness couldn't have been that of a child who blurts out the little she knows rather than shedding the ballast of too much knowledge to achieve simplicity. Of course they're yours, she insisted when I questioned their provenance. You just forgot about them. She may have thought that by producing a false miracle, she could inspire me to perform a true one, though she was, of course, also showing me up, denying it, confounding our identities, and to the degree that I connived in this perverse act of inverted plagiarism, stoking my grandiosity. Young children may be harder to fool than their parents like to think, but they often don't have the courage of their disbeliefs. Disbelief is essential to good writing, which in my experience is a line-by-line combat with self-forgery. In that respect, it's a humble version of Pascal's bet. Can I or can I not, through a feat of style, prove my existence to intelligent skeptics, none more skeptical than I am? But I also write to discover the nature of my affinity with an elusive subject, my mother, who was only rarely real to herself.